Welcome to The Whole View. I'm Stacy Toth of Real Everything, and I'm here each week to dive deeper into how we can find happiness and health inside and out through self-love, body positivity, and discovering new ways to be our best selves. Before we get started, a reminder, this podcast is for general educational purposes and is not intended to diagnose, advise, or treat any physical or mental illness. And while Dr. Sheliah is a practicing pediatric dermatologist, she's not yours. So we always recommend that you see a licensed health professional accordingly. That said, I do want to welcome you, Dr. Sheliah Maguiness, to the show, mother of 2 tween boys and licensed practicing pediatric dermatologist, also co-founder of Strike Club, a personal care line made just for teens and tweens. She is a double board certified pediatric dermatologist and the division director for pediatric dermatology at the University of Minnesota. Although you don't have a Minnesota accent, so I'm curious where you're from. She is a national leader in pediatric dermatology and currently serves as president of the Society for Pediatric Dermatology. Dr. Maguiness is routinely recognized for her outstanding clinical care and as a top doctor annually since 2015. You can find and follow her on Instagram and TikTok, and we'll put those links and all the information in the show notes for you. But welcome to The Whole View. Dr. Sheliah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I always like to tell us some fact that we wouldn't know otherwise, embarrassing, fun, little something or other to get to know you a little more personally.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stacy, for having me. You hit the nail on the head because I am not from Minnesota. I'm actually not even from the US. I'm Canadian. So I grew up in Canada. My family is still in Canada, parts of Toronto and Halifax. But throughout my training pathway, I moved every 4 years for like 20 years because I did my undergraduate degree and then medicine and then residency and then a fellowship. And in fellowship, that's where I met my current partner and is why we are now in Minnesota. We joined the faculty here at the U of M together in 2014. And fun fact about me, my partner is also a dermatologist. He's a dermatopathologist. So you can imagine the dinner table conversations that go on at our home.
And all the friends who come over and say, hey, look at this for me.
Exactly. Oh, I get lots of rash pictures all the time. And that's a thing that I would love your listeners to know about too. I think everyone knows, I think, what a dermatologist is. A board certified subspecialty, it's its own residency training. But many people don't actually know that there are pediatric dermatologists. We're our own subspecialty of dermatology, and it requires extra training, a full year of fellowship training after you're already accredited in dermatology. So you end up with 2 board certifications to really understand how skin disease shows up in infants, children, and young adults. And there's lots to that. And so PedDerm is a small but growing specialty. And I have the honor and privilege of serving as our president of our Society for Pediatric Dermatology this year.
I am fascinated by that because I certainly did not know my kids when they were toddlers. I had one especially who had like severe eczema and still has like scars on his back from how badly it was going and did not get help or support that I needed from our pediatrician in terms of what we needed to do. Like the only suggestion that was given was steroids. And for my not yet 3-year-old, like that scared me. So I made a bunch of lifestyle changes, and we'll talk a little bit about ingredients and things that you recommended don't on the show. But it was also foods that were irritating and inflaming him, which nobody had suggested could be a potential problem either. Like no one suggested, hey, go see a pediatric allergist or a pediatric dermatologist or anything like that. And I do think that you putting yourself out there on social media and getting on podcasts and doing that kind of thing will help other parents to not go through the kind of like self-struggle that we had to try to figure things out for him. And eventually we did, right? But I would have much preferred him to not be struggling in pain for as long as he was. And so I appreciate that work that you're doing, and hopefully more parents can learn that there are options beyond just the pediatrician not being as helpful as they might want them to be.
Oh, Stacy, I'm sorry that your son went through that. It's really very sad, but unfortunately very common too. So I think you're really right about that. One of the visions that I have for my rather new, this foray into social media and taking patient education a little bit closer to the patients themselves. That's what I've been trying to do for the past 1.5 years now since the pandemic. And that's one of my big goals, is just to educate not only my peers, the pediatricians and primary care providers, that we're here and we're here to help you, but also patients. I think more and more we're seeing that our patients and families and caregivers are accessing healthcare information on social media. And if we as board certified doctors aren't in there joining the conversation, then we're not going to have a voice. We really need to be present, because the way that people are consuming information has changed dramatically. And I've seen that just in my own work with my national society, my work with the American Academy of Pediatrics, and then in my own social media presence, I've really seen the way things are changing. So access is a big issue. And your pediatrician may not have known about peds derm as a specialty, and kind of that's our fault. We need to be better educators and be more present so that people know we're here to help when they need us.
Well, I would like to start our conversation on a much more practical level. A lot of what you're sharing on social and what I'm dealing with in my present life as a mom of 4 teens, I constantly get the question about parents who are starting to have conversations about hygiene with their kids. So as we move out of like that toddler to 6-year-old age, and you're just teaching basic like how to brush teeth, but then you get into actual self-care, hygiene, face washing, what kind of process or words or approach would you take to help it be a little less embarrassing, but still meet the needs that we all have to practice good hygiene and self-care?
Oh, this is a great question. Stacy, do you have boys or girls, or how do your kids identify?
I have 3 boys and 1 non-binary child. So I have
Okay,
a lot of like funk. I have a lot of funk. That's what I have.
got it. Okay, sounds good. Because I think that what I'm seeing, and if you've been on social media lately, you've probably seen this too, is there's a little bit of a dichotomy happening where those who are identifying as feminine or girls are almost doing a little too much when it comes to hygiene and self-care. This is the Sephora baby trend, where these tween and teen girls are flocking to beauty outlets like Ulta and Sephora and really trying to get their hands on these trendy, complicated, unnecessarily expensive and cumbersome skincare routines that really is not appropriate for their changing skin. So on the one hand, we have that going on, and you would have to be not on social media at all if you weren't aware of that phenomenon. And then on the other hand, we have those who are identifying more masculine, are boys, who are less likely to engage in even the basics of self-care. And that's something I noticed in my clinical practice too. A lot of times the girls are coming in with all these products, and it's really hard for me to get some of my teen males to even make eye contact or really engage. And I think there's a bunch of reasons for that. Some of them are like structural, societal reasons, but I think that we don't model as well for the males as we do for the females. The females are often seeing their moms or even their dads sometimes, maybe not as often as moms, doing the steps to take care of their skin, putting on a moisturizer, washing their face. They're seeing this modeled. But I'm wondering, and when I ask the questions in clinic and to friends, are boys having that kind of behavior modeled in the same way? Maybe they're not. And so that's a really great way to open a conversation with your teen, whether they're male, female, it doesn't matter. How are you starting that self-care conversation? A lot of times as a mom, you're going to want to relate it to yourself. Oh, I see that you might have a little breakout. Let me tell you about what I did when I was a kid. I also struggled. Sometimes there's a strong family history of acne, and you can see it popping up. But any little opening to say, you know what, this is such a great time to start talking about what it looks like to take good care of yourself and good care of your skin. Involving them, making it fun, taking them with you when you're hitting a run to one of the retailers to find out, okay, well, what's resonating with my child right now? Let's walk through the aisle. Let's see what you're thinking. But that can be a great way to start the process. Because a lot of times when your kids, after that age of 6 or 7, when they're getting more autonomous and being more independent and they close the door of the bathroom, like you don't know what's happening in there. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I truly don't know what's happening. Sometimes I wonder, how could you be in there for so long and come out and still be so
Still
sticky?
not clean. Yes, I
Yes.
agree.
No, I think those are all really good points. And I definitely, it's been interesting. I have one of my 3 biological male children has much more of an interest in hygiene than the other 2. And he asked me to take him to Sephora. He wanted to try to find a cologne. And I am very like non-toxic, anti-fragrance type person, but it's his money and he has a job and he worked for it. And so I'm like, okay, I'll go with you. And he wanted me to try to help him find a better one. Right. And so after trying on about a dozen different cologne or like spraying them into the air and all these things, seeing the price tags, he's like, Mom, I have a headache. This is nasty. Let's go home. So I think there's also value in
Ah,
not just guiding them through these stores that you were saying, but like it was painful for me to go there and to be like supportive of something that I did not believe in. But I do think that if we as parents show up for our children in these different ways in modeling, yes, but in also like having taught him enough to know that when he got a headache from spraying all those colognes, that oh, maybe mom's education about toxins and fragrance is a real thing. Like, let me roll my eyes and get out of here and I'll let her help me pick one. But I think too, he's more willing to like, he'll take a shower every morning on his own. He's obsessive about making sure that he has enough deodorant. Like when he has to have 2 at all times so that when he opens the second one, he makes me buy a new one. So he'll never, ever run out. Whereas my other 2, like biological boys are very like totally disengaged from self-care. I have to be like, did you put on deodorant? And if you did, it was not effective. But in like very nice sort of ways, because I have heard and been around other parents who have said things to kids, and I can tell it hurts their feelings,
yeah.
right? It's really hard to hear like you smell bad or different kinds of things. And so we do try to have conversation around things like, how can I help you feel like you want to go take a shower? Would having different products help you? Or like if they're not washing their hands after they go to the bathroom for everything that I do as a parent, can you please just wash your hands? Right? Like, would having a different kind of soap be beneficial in the bathroom? Do you like the gel kind of soap or the foaming kind of soap or the bar kind of soap? And I think for me, asking those questions and leaving it open for them allows for a little of that less cringe or embarrassment versus like my non-binary child does get breakouts sometimes. And if I point out, like I remember once I was like, oh, look, we have matching chin breakouts. They got so mad at me and like they don't want me to point out the imperfections or anything like that. Right. And so whereas maybe another kid would be like, oh, whatever. But I think for me as a parent, at least, it's more if I ask questions and leave myself open and welcoming to the kids, then hopefully they will come.
I
Yeah.
love your story. I love your
Yeah.
story about the fragrance. As you asked the questions, you showed up to support him, even though it wouldn't have been your choice. And in the end, your child made a decision themselves about this fragrance, right? And that's a new trend, by the way. It's like all over social media too, this smell maxing where they're like, lots of cologne is being bought by various tweens and teens as well. But that's a new thing. And I'm glad that your child made their own decision about that. I also love what you said about asking questions because, like I mentioned, when your child goes into the bathroom and closes the door, you don't know what's happening. So you don't know if they really understand how to wash their body. And so you can say, hey, you know what? I would love to know, what soap did you use? Where did you use it? Did you know you can wash your armpits and your bottom area? And this is the soap you need to do that with. Because, like, honestly, you might be surprised to find out that your teen is using shampoo head to toe all over everywhere and irritating their skin and their face, or maybe they're skipping it all together and they think just rinsing off is okay. But asking the questions and the education behind it then can be a good conversation starter too, because we know that tweens and teens care. They might act like they don't care, but when you point it out, you're knowing that they do care. So setting them up for success. And I also really, it resonated with me what you said about like, what products do you like? And I think for the boys or for those who are identifying masculine, it's really tricky because when you look at the shelf, all you have to do is walk up and down at Target or Walmart, and you will see that almost everything for self-care, skincare, face care is really set up and marketed for girls. It really is. There's not a lot of gender neutral. There's not a lot of true masculine. And so these boys are always either borrowing from mom, borrowing from sister, and feel like they don't have their own tools. And when there's that white space there, when there's like a whole market that hasn't been developed, what are they supposed to think? Oh, it's not important. I shouldn't care. There's no even face wash for this. And that's really what we found as moms when we were trying to give our boys the tools for self-care, that there really wasn't anything available. And that's where kind of Strike Club was born.
It makes a lot of sense. And I can see how not seeing something for yourself makes you feel like, oh, that's not for me, right? At the same time, there is this toxic masculinity kind of perception in culture and society as much as there is this Sephora baby some kind of thing.
It's
right?
like two sides of the totem pole. Like, can't we like in the middle
Right,
somewhere?
right.
Yeah.
Neither one great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for me, I definitely have found luck in saying to my kids, hey, I'm going to do a charcoal mask. Do you want to do one with me? Literally every single time I've done that, my kids have been like, yeah. And they'll make fun of me and we'll poke fun at each other while we're doing it. But we also like play music while the charcoal mask is drying, or I'll say to them, hey, don't forget that when you're done, you want to actually wash it off your face with face wash and then put on a moisturizer, because now we've taken all this stuff out of your skin. It's going to dry up if you don't put something else in. And it's really an opportunity too, while you're demonstrating the self-care in a, whether it's masculine or not way, right? To show them like, hey, this can actually be fun or interesting. Like we can have a good time while we're doing it. And choosing something that feels more masculine, like when you're putting a charcoal mask on your face, I do think that there's a little bit of like versus like,
sure. But look what you're doing. You're making it fun and you're including them. Those are great things. That's a really great inviting way to empower our kids and boys and girls alike. Like, honestly, self-care really encompasses a wide range of things we do for ourselves every day to take care of ourselves. And when our kids show up, wash their face, put on a sunscreen, we can then say, hey, look at you. You're doing such a great job taking care of yourself. Your skin is gonna thank you 30 years from now that you did this. Like, good for you. It should be a positive reinforcement and empowering. I did do something good for myself today. I care about myself. I love myself. Those are important things to start early, those habits and that self-talk.
I love that. Yes. So I think one of the questions that a lot of parents have then is like, okay, if I want to start, I want to help do this with my kids or for my kids, empower them. How do you even start navigating the products that are out there? What are some of the red flags and green flags that you see when you're looking at products that are on the shelf at all these stores you've mentioned?
Great question. So families are always asking me, what do we need? What's the basic for even myself or for any teen or tween just starting out, trying to take care of their skin? What are the basics? What do we need to do? I think the foundation is washing your face. It definitely all starts with washing your face and a gentle cleanser. You mentioned fragrance-free, hypoallergenic, something that's not going to be too irritating to skin that isn't quite mature and that is changing and under the influence of hormonal change. So something really gentle twice a day. And then a moisturizer at nighttime is a great thing to start. Now, if your child has really oily skin or it doesn't seem dry, you could give them moisturizer. But in the morning, parents can feel great about saying yes to a really great sunscreen, broad spectrum SPF every day before heading to school, heading to sports, something that they could maybe reapply if they're sweating or swimming throughout the summer months. But I think those three things are really the basics. And honestly, they're the crux of any foundational skincare regimen. So that's really what you need to start with.
I could not get my kids to wash their face twice a day if like I paid them cash for it. If every time I was like, I'll give you $1 every time you wash your face, they still wouldn't have done it twice a day.
Okay.
So they're better now. They're a little bit older, but I personally am curious what your take on this was. Told them to wash their face at night. And what I did is I got them like cleansing cloth type, like makeup remover, but had micellar water for actual cleansing properties and put it like on their nightstand. Like, and if you forget to wash your face while you're brushing your teeth before bed, at least use this before you go to bed. And my thought process was, at least they're not rubbing all the environmental toxins into their face through their pillow every single night. Like if they just wash their face once with this wipe before bed, it'll help at least a little bit. I'm curious your take on that.
Actually, I love that, Stacy. And so I did develop our own wipe for Strike Club because I do agree that tweens and teens get busy. They have really busy lives. They're staying up late. There's so much change going on. And so adding things into the mix, like, yes, washing your face twice a day can be hard when you haven't done that before. So a wipe is a great thing, and it can certainly remove dirt and debris and get your face clean. No sink necessary, right? You can do that quickly. It can be on the go, throw it in your gym bag for sports. So yes, I do like wipes, and I love the fact that you used one with a micellar water, something that has just a little bit of a very mild cleanser or surfactant in it. Again, I prefer fragrance-free and not overly drying, but that's a good compromise and something that they can also take on the go. So I do like wipes.
I mean, so you mentioned SPF earlier. I'm a huge SPF fan, and not just from the perspective of the benefit of preventing UV damage, but also from the perspective of my teens, because mineral SPF has zinc in it, which is anti-inflammatory and can actually help with reducing the inflammation with acne. What is your take on SPF? I know that there's been a lot of news about carcinogenic contaminants, while at the same time, we don't want people to not have to avoid SPF in some sort of way because they're worried about it, because too much sun exposure can be incredibly harmful as well. And actually, now that I'm saying that, I'm like, wow, I wonder if a pediatric dermatologist would have been the place to go after my kids got like severe sunburn or different kinds of things instead of just dealing with it on my own. But yeah, I would love to hear your kind of perspective on all of that.
Thanks for bringing it up. It's a very common question. So I will start by echoing what you said and letting our listeners know that any sunscreen is better than nothing when it comes to protecting yourself from the damaging effects of UV. We know even one bad sunburn will elevate your overall lifetime risk of skin cancer. And not only the skin cancer risk, but the photoaging, the hyperpigmentation, the effects of the sun can be cumulative. So yes, wear your sunscreen. Now, the ingredients in sunscreen have really, I think, come under more scrutiny over the last 5 years, as you've mentioned. And it's because of a study, or actually two studies that were done in 2019 that looked at application of some of the chemical filter sunscreens that are really common, still widely used, and the fact that many of them are actually rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream, even with one application on the skin. Now, we've been using these sunscreen filters for a long time. There's no need to panic or fearmonger about them. But the issue then is that someone needs to do the testing. And the FDA did task these sunscreen companies with, let's do a little more testing on this. Let's make sure that we can really give our stamp of generally recommended as safe and effective, or GRACE. And so for now, until additional testing gets done to ensure the safety of these chemical sunscreens, which they may well be very safe, and certainly the FDA is not pulling them from the shelves. You can still buy them, use them, and many people prefer them, to be honest, because they're a bit more elegant when they go on. You can use them in a spray. But however, the current recommendations are that the mineral sunscreens are the ones that are generally recommended as safe and effective. And the mineral sunscreens are the zinc oxide and the titanium dioxide. And you can see them in combination or separate. And I think for discerning consumers, where if they only want to stick to a mineral-based sunscreen, that's when you take the product, you flip it over, look on the back, and in the box that says active ingredients, it should just say zinc or titanium and no other chemicals. Otherwise, if there's a mix of chemicals, you'll be getting exposure to a chemical sunscreen, which may or may not mean anything. But I will tell you that as a pediatric dermatologist, I'm all for safety first. And the fact is that the mineral sunscreens are also the least irritating to the skin and the less likely to cause any allergic reactions. So for the kiddos that I treat who have really young skin, thin skin, babies and toddlers, their skin is a little thinner. They're more prone to absorbing even more things through their skin. So for me as a physician and a mom, I tend to recommend the mineral sunscreens first. And I like to go with an SPF 30 or greater and then reapply it when needed.
I find too that another trick to that, checking the box, because the labels can be so tricky. I don't know how many bottles I've pulled over where the front says it's a mineral sunscreen and then I turn it over and there's chemical filters added. The other thing that as a consumer to be aware of is that if it is 100% clear, it is a chemical sunscreen. Like there is no physical way for a mineral sunscreen to be clear. It can go on sheer, right? But like the actual zinc and the titanium are physical minerals that are not clear. And so you're not getting like a physical barrier protection on your skin, which is what you need for that sunscreen. If it's clear, then it has the chemical sunscreen in it. So you mentioned aerosols and that being something that users might desire, right? And I know when my kids were younger, it was so much easier when they're excited, they're at the beach, you're at the pool, they're trying to like get away from you and you're holding them by like one arm as they're trying to run to the pool, trying to spray them down with something. I know how convenient that is. Can you talk a little bit about the inhalation risk that I know you shared a little bit about on social?
Yeah, there's a couple things about the aerosol sunscreens. First of all, they're going to have a propellant in them like butane, et cetera. And then when that's in the air around you, it's not safe to inhale it. So we don't really usually recommend aerosol sunscreens for babies under 2. And then just in general, it is harder to get an even application because you don't know exactly how thick or thin that layer is going on. And the instructions on how many passes to give are really vague. So I think, again, any sunscreen is better than nothing. But for babies and younger kids, I would steer clear of a aerosol sunscreen. Now, there are differences in the pump-based sunscreen. So the aerosols are the ones that will have the propellant and that we really don't want to be inhaling. And then there's one called a continuous pump, where it actually is just more like a pump and it's a more liquidy type of sunscreen, a more lotion-based. And those ones will not usually spray all over to the point of risking significant inhalation. But again, it's a thinner formulation. The application might not be as even as if you did it yourself with a cream or a lotion. So in childhood, I am typically recommending a mineral-based sunscreen, SPF 30, and a cream or lotion formulation. I also really like the sticks.
Because I think just going to say,
yeah,
the sticks work so well for my kids, especially on the face. Yeah,
exactly. Because then you're not risking the lotion running into the eye and causing burning or stinging. I love it for those wiggly toddlers where you can just paint it on and who cares if they look all white and pasty. That's just something that we're going to deal with at the beach today. And then, of course, the broader conversation about sun protection is not all just applying a sunscreen. It's using protective clothing, hats, sunglasses. They've gotten amazing with the rash guard and UV protective clothing. It's all great now. So you can cover up well and then save the bikini for times when the UV index is not at its highest. Like 11 to 4, when you look on your smartphone and you look at the weather app, you can see the UV index. If it's 3 or greater, you need full protection.
Super helpful to know. I am wondering, so you're sharing a lot about for children under 2 versus not. And also, I don't know how much experience you have, but I know as a pregnant mom, there were labels of like whether or not it's safe for pregnancy or not safe for pregnancy. And what I heard, what I learned as like a La Leche League leader and doing my investigations on kellymom.com and all these things is brands can't test on small children and on pregnant women because that's not safe. But there are some products where we know, like, hey, that is a hormone disruptor, so that is not going to be advisable. Or there's really nothing that would lead me to believe that this could be problematic, but there's no label that says it is actually safe for small children. Can you talk a little bit about how we can all be empowered in making some of those decisions ourselves and understanding that nuance a bit?
Oh, this is a tricky one because as the testing is just not there enough yet. So you can certainly Google any ingredient and look specifically at pregnancy category. And a lot of times it'll just say pregnancy category C, not enough information. Testing in animals shows us something, but it's unclear. So a lot of times you're going into it a little bit blind, but I will say that there are a couple of ingredients that we use commonly in dermatology that are not indicated in pregnancy, and those are the topical retinoids for acne. So some of the topical retinoids, especially one called Hygiene, is not safe or not felt to be safe in pregnancy, but yet agree it hasn't been well studied, so we don't exactly know for sure. And isn't that one of the huge issues with the entire health, wellness, and beauty industry in general is that these ingredients that we're talking about, they are not regulated at all by the FDA. Well, the one that I just mentioned is the tazarotene is a prescribed medication that you would get from your doctor. But a lot of what's on the shelf, like a retinol or other types of harsh exfoliating acids, different preservatives, all of these things are not regulated very tightly by the FDA at all. So there is a lot of the unknown with respect to those things. But I'm going to loop back into something that you said earlier about fragrance and whether it is fragrance one of the culprits in terms of having ingredients that may or may not be problematic, like hormone disruptors, like phthalates, et cetera. And again, fragrance is not very regulated. And in fact, fragrance, when it occurs and on the label and you just read fragrance, that one ingredient that the company has told you could be actually hundreds or even thousands of ingredients used to make up that particular fragrance. And companies are not made to disclose all the different ingredients in that fragrance because it's thought to be like their secret, a trade secret, so that people can't copy them or make the same fragrance. But there is legislation right now that's with the House that is looking at making things a little bit more transparent. So there is a bill that was passed in, I think it was called the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act. You may or may not have heard of it, but this would be.
I lobbied for it.
You did a great job. Thank you for your advocacy. But this is really, I'd love your information, your take too, since you did the lobbying. But this is really to give the FDA a little bit more oversight when it comes to ingredients in the health, wellness, and beauty industry. And I think it's a great first step. There's much more work to be done. At least now, hopefully, the FDA could force a recall of certain products, because before this legislation, the FDA could suggest to a brand, you better take that down, like what's happened with benzene in sunscreen over the past several years. There's been a couple of recalls with respect to that contaminant, but they don't have the legal right to force the recall. So it's interesting and lots of work to be done there. But going back to what to look for, I think on the label, if you see a product that says fragrance-free, hypoallergenic, dermatologist tested, you can be at least sure that some testing was done on that product to make sure that there are no skin reactions.
I love that you brought up. Listeners who know me are going to be like, Stacy, you planted that. And I'm like, nope, I really do have guests on the show and I don't like prompt you all to say what I want you to say. It's just that legislation is so incredibly powerful for us as Americans to be protected from potentially harmful ingredients. And the sad thing is, as you said, things are put out on the shelf and it's almost like it's innocent until proven guilty. Whereas, as you mentioned earlier, you are going to err on the side of safety as a mom, as a human. I want to err on the side of safety. I want things to be proven safe before I put it on my body, not for it to be proven bad after I put it on my body. And that's the approach that we take in the country right now. And I wish that Mocha had better teeth. Unfortunately, like it hasn't been funded because of the
I know.
political
Mm.
complications, and then there's been delays and all these things. But I think knowing that it was passed, knowing that consumers are driving change of some kind is also forcing people who are making products to be more thoughtful in what their consumer is looking for. And the double-edged sword to that is the greenwashing of companies who I've seen so many companies put fragrance free on the front of the bottle, and then I turn it over and fragrance is listed in the ingredients. And they're allowed to say that because it's like, well, it's not, if their perception is it's not a strong fragrance or it's only covering up the chemical smell or whatever that loophole is that they're going to point to. Right. So it's just, it does make it super complicated. And as we're talking to and educating our teens and our children about these things, I can't expect my 16-year-old who wanted to go to Sephora to like fully be on board with the fact that fragrance listed in his ingredients is harmful because frankly, he doesn't care that it's harmful. He wants to have Doritos and soda every day. Like the last thing that he cares about is fragrance or whatever. But I think educating them and just being consistent with this information and leading by example and saying like, well, the things that I'm going to buy with my money to put in the house for you, like if you want to buy the native version of the body wash that has not the fragrance in the ingredients list, I will buy that for you. But if you want to buy like this other brand that has the who knows what in the ingredients, like you can do that with your money. That's your choice. It's your body and your choice. And I think that's for me as a parent, the kind of line that I've had to take in terms of like empowering my kids to feel autonomous. And I'm like, if how my children are going to rebel is in using products that have fragrance in the ingredient list, I feel like I've been a successful parent, right? Where at the same time, I also know that like the world around us is imperfect. There's hexavalent chromium in my water supply in my home. I just like recently found this out in the last couple of months that the same stuff that's like in Erin Brockovich is like in our water. Nothing's being done about it. I don't know why. And we're drinking that, right? We're breathing the air that has all this kind of pollution in it all the time. And our skin is being exposed to all this stuff. Like there is no perfection, but
There truly isn't. And I think some of the science out there would be like that the danger is really in the dose of it and how much would it really need to present a problem to your body. Now, that said, like some things there are no safe level of, like benzene or whatever, but we are getting exposed to it just it's hard as a mom and a doctor because I get that desire to really like, let's think about what it really means to be clean and what is clean beauty and what is a product clean that we put on our skin. And I would argue that I would love more board certified dermatologists to be involved in this because I really think there's an opportunity here for us to redefine what it means to have something be clean on your skin. Because you're right, there is so much greenwashing and there's this turn toward natural, botanical. Let's throw every single essential oil we can into this product, right? But at the same time, poison ivy is completely natural. And that obviously we don't want anywhere near our skin because it's going to cause a lot of allergic contact dermatitis. And what you said before about products being unscented versus fragrance free, that is even not regulated. A product is allowed to say unscented, but still include a masking fragrance to cover up whatever smell it smelled like before. And then products are allowed to say fragrance free without any synthetic fragrance, but they're allowed to put essential oils in it. So really, it's all over the place and it needs more regulation so that the consumers can untangle the web. And some of that is what I've tried to do with some of my social media content, like go in there and say, okay, this is too full of botanicals. This will irritate the skin. What is clean? What is not? Because everything is chemicals. Not every chemical is bad, but some can be bad for you. And some are definitely bad for your skin.
So true. And I'm going to take like sound bites of you saying, poison ivy is natural and it can give us contact dermatitis because it's a line I use all the time when someone's like, but it's natural. And I'm like, y'all, asbestos is natural. I don't want it in my makeup. So that's another thing that, we've mentioned a couple times are these third-party tests that are coming up and showing that there is carcinogens that are not safe in any level. You mentioned benzene, mentioned asbestos, and we're seeing it in sunscreen. We're seeing it in benzoyl peroxide, acne type products, and they're really countless. I think if people were doing third-party testing on every product that's on the market, we would find more of these contaminations because it's part of the manufacturing process and all these kinds of things. How do you approach this? I know you shared a little bit on social, right? How do you, in that kind of balanced way that you're talking about as a doctor, as a mom, approach some of these things?
Well, we could talk about the benzoyl peroxide issue if you want. I think the contamination with benzene in sunscreen in 2020, 2021 was really due to manufacturing processes, and it was mostly the aerosol sprays that were implicated. And actually, that resulted in companies recalling vast numbers of sunscreens, which I actually thought was really good. Benzene and benzoyl peroxide is a bit of a trickier issue because Valisure, which is an independent research lab, they've known, I think, for many years that benzene itself as a molecule, the benzoyl peroxide component of the molecule, isn't very stable at high temperatures. So that's what their studies showed, that when you take a benzoyl peroxide product for acne, and there were like 100 or like 98 or something that were tested, and you subject it to really high temperatures, that benzoyl peroxide breaks apart. So it's not a manufacturing, but it's actually the chemical itself. And it is releasing benzene. And if it's at really high temperatures, sometimes like much more than 1,000 times what is the allowable amount. But in a way, some of that testing was a bit artificial. And that's the reason why companies haven't responded with massive recalls this time, because their argument is we're not storing the benzoyl peroxide at super elevated temperatures, right? So we really don't, when they tested at a normal temperature, there might have been like a little bit of benzene leaking, but it wasn't at a dangerous level until you start to get up into high temperatures. So it's very hard to know what to do with that information. I don't want to fearmonger and say you've got to get rid of all your benzoyl peroxide. I don't think that's appropriate. It's still like a good treatment for over-the-counter acne management and wash. But at the same time, we want to be careful. So store it properly. Make sure you don't leave it in the car. Choose one that's made in the US and transported in the US, because I do think it could get hot on some of those trucks that they transport things on. So being mindful about it, storing it properly, I think that's probably the best we can do right now until perhaps some of the companies do their own internal testing to see what's happening with that benzoyl peroxide. And then a lot of families are asking for alternatives, and there are some alternatives to benzoyl peroxide. If you really don't feel safe using a benzoyl peroxide, you want to take that risk out 100%. You could think about using salicylic acid as another acne ingredient that can be used. It's available over the counter at 1 or 2% in many washes. Other things that are antimicrobial are sodium hypochlorite, which is what I have formulated my Strike Club washes with, and hypochlorous acid. Hypochlorous acid sprays are really convenient. They're having a moment right now. It's a natural water-based molecule that is really antimicrobial. It doesn't sting or burn. It won't lead to antimicrobial resistance. It gained popularity during the COVID pandemic, but it's really a convenient thing to use as well. So those are things that you could do instead of benzoyl peroxide.
I appreciate you breaking down the science on that. I also did like a super deep dive into that Valisure report. And what was interesting to me is that it's some of the ones that they had said, not all of them. I believe that there were 2 that they pulled out of the report that they tested of like in temperatures where you might have like steam in your bathroom from like a hot shower, even inside the packaging of those products, they were able to have measurable amounts of benzene coming out of those benzoyl peroxide products. And so for me, I love the idea of just if there's any risk at all, salicylic acid worked for me really well when I was in my 20s and had more acne prone skin. And I love the other suggestions that you've given too, just because it's like it's a no for me. If there's like any risk of
Sure.
all of a carcinogen, right? So
Yeah, and it's a personal choice. And as consumers, we choose with our dollars, right? That's what we do.
yeah. Well, I thank you so much for all of your knowledge. I think there was so much where I was like nodding along, like, yep, I'm glad listeners are hearing that from somebody else other than me. And I always like to leave people with some positive, actionable suggestions that they can take away to be of service either to themselves or for their children or for their grandchildren or whatever it might be. I'd love to hear what your ideas are. If people are feeling overwhelmed right now and are like, gosh, you're telling me to change all these things that I have, this SPF I've been using my whole life, or all these kinds of things. If someone's feeling overwhelmed, instead, what could they just take away today to like just do this one thing? Start small and feel good about that change.
I think we talked so much about teens today and teen skincare and teen empowerment. So I want your listeners to realize that skincare for tweens and teens does not need to be expensive or cumbersome. Make it fun. Start a conversation. Include them in decisions because what can be better than establishing good hygiene habits early on? Their skin will only thank them years down the road. And they're obviously stepping up and doing some of that self-care, embracing some of that vulnerability. I love all of those things about encouraging tweens and teens to really start taking good care of themselves and their skin.
Agreed. I love that too. Can you remind listeners where to continue to follow you and learn more?
Yes, so we were talking about my new social media presence, which has been over the past 3 years. I've been on TikTok. I learned how to use that one first. So I'm Dr. Sheliah on TikTok, and currently Instagram is Sheila.m.
And we'll put the information and show notes for you listeners because Sheila is spelled with the AGH at the end. So we want to make sure that you find Dr. Sheila. And also strikeclub.com with a Y for more information about the products that you referenced. Was there anything else that we forgot or didn't cover that you want to share with listeners?
I think we covered a lot, but I'm happy to jump back on another time and do baby with you.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's been a while for me. Every time I see anything baby related these days, I'm like, gosh, we didn't have that when I had babies. And then I'm like, oh, I'm doing the thing. I'm saying thing that old people say.
Right.
Yes. No, I sincerely appreciate you being here and sharing so much. And listeners, thank you for showing up and learning today. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave a review and to follow or subscribe in whatever podcast app you're using. As always, we appreciate your willingness to be open to grow through your own personal changes. No one is perfect, but in listening, learning, and unlearning, we can choose to become better versions of ourselves for ourselves. Thank you so much, listeners. And thank you, Dr. Sheila. It's been wonderful to connect.
Thanks so much.